Do you know, sometimes the people we trust the most, the people we build our lives around, can turn into the very reason our world collapses? Tonight, I will tell you a story. It's not just for children, it's for every soul who has ever felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of loneliness, and the slow fire of justice that eventually arrives. Before I begin, let me say this clearly. This is a fictional story, created for entertainment and learning. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental. Now let me take you to a quiet town called Rivermist, where the sky always smelled of fresh rain and the nights were filled with the sounds of crickets. It was here that I, Eleanor, lived with my husband Arthur. At first glance, we were the perfect couple. A small house with a garden of roses, neighbors who admired our smiles, and evenings spent with laughter around the wooden table. But life, as I learned, has shadows that grow silently even in the brightest of lights. Arthur was not always cruel. When we first met, he was gentle, soft-spoken, and promised me a life where I would never feel alone. I was young and hopeful, and I believed every word he said. Years went by, and I gave him my loyalty, my strength, and my heart. But slowly, something inside him changed. The kindness faded. The love turned into distance. He became restless, as if the walls of our home were chains around his ankles. I remember the evening it all began to fall apart. The wind outside rattled the windows of our house, and Arthur sat across from me at the table, staring at his plate without touching it. His silence was louder than any scream. I asked him what was wrong, but he simply pushed his chair back and said, "This place suffocates me, you suffocate me." And those words carved scars deeper than any knife could. Weeks passed, and he grew colder. He stopped coming home some nights. When he did, his eyes avoided mine, and his voice carried no warmth. I tried, oh how I tried, to remind him of the man I once loved. I cooked his favorite meals, tended the garden, and prayed that he would see me again. But one night, he didn't just ignore me, he abandoned me. He walked out of our home in Rivermist, leaving me with nothing but silence and the echo of his footsteps fading away. The neighbors whispered. Some pitied me, others judged me. I was the woman left behind, the wife discarded like an old coat. My nights were long, filled with tears that soaked the pillow. I wondered if I had failed him, if I had failed myself. But slowly, through the pain, I began to see the truth. Arthur had not left because I was unworthy. He had left because his heart was poisoned by greed, by selfishness, by the desire to control a destiny that was never his to hold. You see, Arthur had ambitions beyond our little town. He wanted wealth, power, and recognition. He believed that by cutting ties with me, by discarding the life we had built, he could rise higher, faster, stronger. But destiny does not forget. Life keeps a record of every cruelty, every betrayal. And as much as he thought he was escaping, Arthur was only digging his own grave. I survived. Oh yes, I survived. I worked in the bakery at the edge of town, kneading dough before sunrise, my hands raw and tired. I sold flowers in the market, my roses carrying the fragrance of resilience. People began to respect me not for being Arthur's wife, but for being Eleanor, the woman who stood tall even when life tried to crush her. And while I built myself piece by piece, Arthur was busy chasing illusions. Years later, I would hear rumors about him, that he had gone to a city called Greyhaven, where he tried to start a business. That he lied, cheated, and stepped on others to climb higher. But every ladder he built crumbled beneath him. He lost friends. He lost money. And eventually, he lost the one thing he valued most, his reputation. But I will not rush. Because his fall, my dear listeners, was not sudden. It was slow, painful, and filled with the kind of suffering only fate can deliver. And the irony? He who abandoned me would one day wish he could return. He who silenced me would one day beg to be heard. Stay with me, for in the next part, I will tell you how the same man who cast me out of my home, the same man who laughed at my tears, found himself standing at my door years later. And the price he paid for his betrayal was far greater than he ever imagined. This is not just my story, it is a lesson. That cruelty may thrive for a while, but justice, no matter how late, always arrives. The years passed like autumn leaves drifting down a river. Rivermist grew older, and so did I. My hair turned silver, my hands carried the marks of labor, but my spirit only grew stronger. I was no longer the frightened wife abandoned in the night. I was Eleanor, the woman who rebuilt herself from ashes, who carried her dignity like a crown. But fate has a way of circling back, doesn't it? No matter how far someone runs, the road always curves toward truth. One winter evening, the snow fell gently over Rivermist. I was sitting by the fire in my small home, listening to the crackle of burning wood, when I heard a knock at the door. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, yet my heart recognized it immediately. Slowly, with trembling hands, I opened the door, and there he was, Arthur. But he was not the man I remembered. His shoulders, once proud and tall, were slumped. His eyes, once sharp and full of arrogance, were tired, hollow, and begging for mercy. His clothes were worn, his face lined with regret. In that moment, I saw not the man who had left me, but the shell of a man who had been punished by his own choices. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry wood, "I have nowhere else to go." My breath caught in my throat. All those years of pain, all those nights of tears, all the loneliness I had endured, they came rushing back. And yet, there he was, asking for the very thing he had once denied me: a home, a chance, forgiveness. He told me everything that had happened. How in Greyhaven he built his empire on lies and betrayal, only to watch it crumble piece by piece. How the partners he deceived turned against him. How the wealth he chased slipped through his fingers like sand. And how in the end he was left with nothing but shame. I listened. Oh, I listened. But inside me was a storm. Should I open my arms and welcome him back, the man who had once broken me? Or should I let him stand outside in the cold, as he once left me to shiver in the darkness of loneliness? And then I remembered something. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness does not erase the past. Forgiveness is a fire that sets you free, even if the other person remains chained to their mistakes. So I let him in. I gave him a chair by the fire. I handed him bread and warm tea. But I did not give him my heart. That he had lost the day he abandoned me. Arthur thought he could return and start over, that the wounds he caused would magically vanish. But life doesn't work that way. The people of Rivermist remembered his cruelty. They looked at him with scorn. They whispered about his downfall. And he, the man who once walked with pride, now walked with shame, heavier than any stone. Days turned into weeks, and Arthur stayed in Rivermist. He tried to work in the market, but no one trusted him. He tried to rebuild his name, but his lies haunted him. He grew sick, his body weakening, and he had no one but me to care for him. Do you see the irony, dear listeners? The man who abandoned me in my time of need was now abandoned by the very world he tried to impress. And I, the woman he once cast aside, became his only lifeline. Fate is not cruel. Fate is just. On his final night, Arthur sat by the fire and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Eleanor," he whispered, "I thought leaving you would make me free. But it only imprisoned me in regret. I chased the world and lost myself. And the only truth I see now is that I was a fool to hurt you. I did not answer with anger. I did not answer with bitterness. I simply placed my hand on his and said, 'Arthur, life always collects its debts. You paid yours.' And that night, he closed his eyes and his story ended. Now, when I sit here and tell you this tale, I do not tell it to make you sad. I tell it because it holds a truth. That betrayal never brings peace. That running from responsibility never leads to freedom. That those who hurt others eventually find themselves face to face with their own actions. So remember this, my dear audience. Do not measure love by promises made in the heat of passion. Measure it by loyalty, by sacrifice, by the willingness to stay when life gets hard. And if someone betrays you, do not let their cruelty destroy you. Rise, build yourself again. Because in the end, justice does not always come from courts or laws. Sometimes justice comes silently, through the passage of time, through the weight of guilt, and through the stories we leave behind. This was my story, set in the little town of Rivermist. And if you have listened until now, know this. Every heart that has been broken can be healed. Every betrayal carries its own punishment. And every soul that chooses kindness over revenge finds the greatest victory of all: peace.